Brahma Gurur Vishnu Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha Gurureva Param Brahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Chinmayam Vyapyat Sarvam Trailokyam Sacharacharam Atpadam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Tvameva Mata Cha Pita Tvameva Bandhuscha Sakha Tvameva Vedya Dravinam Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva. Jai Guru. Yata sarvani bhutani pratibhanti stitani cha yatraivo pashamam yanti tasmai satyatmane namaha. So we are still in the story of Dashura. Dudes on top of a tree, and a celestial damsel comes by, and he gives her a flower. Poetry for a connubial joining. 12 years later, she brings back the son, and they're in conversation. So where are we in our text now?
Page 106, number 53.
Page 106, number 53. Puneet, would you help us out, please?
Sure. Sankalpena hi sankalpa swayam eva prajayate vardhate swayamevashu dukkhaya na sukhayatu. Thought is indeed born of thought, only by itself. It grows fast by itself for grief, but nor for happiness. That is, the growth of thought or imagination brings only grief, not pleasure.
So it's not just thought here. The word he's using is sankalpa, a wish, a thought, an intention. In this context, it's when the mind starts to spin on things, and I start to develop schemes and strategies and plans, regrets and worry, all that kind of mental activity.
Would you say sankalpa is like obsessive thinking?
That's certainly a kind of sankalpa. Yes, that's a good insight. Yes, but it's subtler than that. It doesn't necessarily have to be just obsessive thinking. But here he's talking about how once you start down the road of a narrative, a story, it breeds more and more thoughting on that. Now, one of the strategies that many people employ in the modern era is what I would call causation hunting. Oh, I have all these syndromes. I have this particular issue and I have that particular issue. And they are compulsive and they're repetitive. So you go to the therapist And after years of therapy, you know why you have the issue. It's because I was over affectionate to my hobby horse. It's because my mother took away my blanket. It's because I wasn't nursed long enough, or I had a grandmother who was abusive, or I had a father that was an alcoholic. What yoga would say is understanding the cause doesn't change the issue, the syndrome that we have. The fellow who invented the EST training, Werner Erhard, used to say, understanding is the booby prize. I know why I'm a jerk, but I'm still a jerk. I know why I'm so unhappy, but I'm still unhappy. So yoga's strategy is different. We don't even need to know the specific causes of our material issues. If you're quiet and you're watching your mind, all that material will be present to you in its present manifestation. You're making love with your spouse, and all of a sudden you have the creepy crawlies. You don't need to go looking for what particular traumatic event might have precipitated that. It's just to be present to it. To be present to it. And not get caught up in the narrative. We talked about last week how the more I focus on a particular mode of thinking, the more real it becomes for me. Yoga strategy is what we call tapas. Tapas literally just means heat. And it means these habituated modes of thinking. Turn the mind from that groove. At first, into auspicious ones. Thought replace. Eventually, we give all of those up. I always think of the story. There's a fellow, he's on Tinder, starts to make a connection with this lady. She's going to come over in a couple days. They're going to meet for the first time. So in the meantime, he's thinking, gee, maybe this is the one. We'll get together. We'll be really connected. But then she'll probably be like all the others. She'll find somebody better and dump me, and I'll be so unhappy and miserable. So finally, when she comes to the door, she rings the doorbell. He opens the door and says, how could you have treated me so badly? That's what our minds do. We make all this stuff up. Make it up. So sankalpa breeds sankalpa. And remember the tremendous law of sankalpa. Any sankalpa consistently maintained that isn't contradicted or conflicted tends towards grossification. So if my habituated thinking is catastrophizing, is fear-based, is conflict-based, based. It's going to become very, very real. Remember the corollary of sankalpa. Whatever you look at, I call it the law of the third eye, your headlamp on your bicycle helmet. Whatever you look at, you're going to think about. Whatever you look at repeatedly, you're going to think about repeatedly. Repeated thought becomes habituated thought. Habituated thought sinks into the unconscious. Powerful sankalpa, and it becomes the law of our life, the way we see the world. So, the point of power. What are you going to look at? Are you going to behold the divinity, ever beholding you in the world? Or are you going to behold the dust? Dust you will become. It's all what we choose to pay attention to. Now, Swamiji used to say in the American, is it the Declaration of Independence that says all men are created equal? Yeah.
Yeah, I believe so.
Anyway, well, first of all, Swami would say it's not true. We may be equal under the law, ideally. But the truth is, some people are smarter than others. Some people are born into privilege that others don't have. Some people are better looking than others. Some people are more athletic than others. We are not created equal at all. But there is one aspect in which we are all equal. Everyone is given 24 hours a day. Nobody's cheated and gets 23. Nobody's special and gets 25. What are you going to choose to do with those 24 hours? And there's the time you're asleep, time you're eating, bathing, etc. But at work, and then all the time beyond that, what do you spend your time doing? What are you looking at? Are you spending your time on social media ranting at other people? Don't be surprised if you've got a ranty universe. Or do you spend your time in the study of scripture, pravachana, teaching one another, meditation, moving through your day with vairagya, detachment? And watch how things change. All right, next verse.
Bhavana bhavamatrena sankalpa shiyate swayam tandulasya yatha charma nashati kriyaya sutta jivasya sahajosyesha nasyatyeva na sanshayah. Thought or imagination wastes away by itself merely by the absence of recollection. That is, when observation is tainted by the memory of the past, it becomes thought or imagination. In the absence of ideation born of the past, pure cognition or perception, which is of the nature of undivided consciousness, is alone present. Son, just as the skin of rice perishes by proper action, This thought or imagination is surely destroyed, though it is the natural disposition of the individual soul. There is no doubt about this.
So the metaphor he's using is like milling rice. You get rice with it has its what do they call it, a husk, and you mill it to get it off. So this is what we have to do with the mind. So let's go through this series of practices that he's giving us. This is really important, practical teaching. So start that verse again, give us in the English the first idea.
Thought or imagination wastes away by itself merely by the absence of recollection.
Yes. Sankalpa wastes away merely by the absence of remembering it, rehearsing it, going it over again and again. There's an English word, resentment, comes from the Latin, re sentire, to feel again. I have a dear friend. He'd had a fight with his mother. She went into her bedroom. 10 minutes later, he goes in and she's lying on the bed, curled up, staring at the wall. My friend David says, "What are you doing, Mom?" She says, "I'm reviewing my misery." Is that what we do? How do we do? Now, there's no magic bullet. This is manual labor. To remember, to turn the mind away. And that stuff withers. We don't see it. Can't remember the person who said most people are just about as happy as they make up their minds to be. Just depends what we choose to focus on. Any thoughts on this? Very important teaching.
I was amazed before I started meditating every day, how much of my mind was just screaming at me and I wasn't even paying attention to. And then I was amazed of where it was going after a year of even noticing that. So yeah, it's very interesting how much I just wasn't even listening to, and yet it was overwhelmingly negative and
How unconscious we are, and how we drag up stories that we've been told from childhood. We think that's who we are. We have kind of a little bit of pride in saying, I'm just a little bit unique because I have this story. Okay, next idea that he goes through in the verse.
He says, that is, when observation is tainted by the memory of the past, it becomes thought or imagination.
Yes, so the idea here is stay in the now, stay present to what you're directly experiencing. Swamiji used to say, put your mind where your hands are working. In Hebrew scripture, there's a marvelous story about Lot's wife. Lot was a character who lived in a city called Sodom. God says, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. They're all bad people. Lot starts to bargain with God. If find 100 good people, will you spare the city? God said, okay. God says, well, if I find 10 good people, will you spare the city? All right. If I find one good person, will you spare the city? All right. God couldn't find any good people. So he says to Lot, get out of Dodge, get out of Sodom, head for the hills. I'm going to send down destruction. And don't look back, head for the hills. This is all mystic symbolism. So Sodom and Gomorrah symbolize this extroversion of our senses into the world. And when we live that way, we're not very good people most of the time. So in Hebrew mysticism, spirituality is frequently indicated by a mountain or a high place. So he says, go up to the hills. Don't look back. This is this chintya. This is this after the fact remuneration. Now, he's there with his wife and his kids, and they're heading out of Sodom. And guess what happens to Lot's wife? Who knows the story?
She turns around, becomes a pillar of salt.
Yes. She thinks with nostalgia of her life back in Sodom, turns around and becomes a pillar of salt. So you and I, when our minds turn to the past, either with regret, oh, I did such a terrible job, how could I, blah, 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 or with longing because we've lost something, oh, that was such a great relationship, too bad he dumped me. Or that job, it was so good, why did it change? We become crystallized. We can no longer move to the high mountain. So this is the teaching. This is the teaching. Swami Tejo Mayananda used to phrase it this way. Do you know how to get rid of your worries? Quit worrying. The circumstances do not create the mind state. The mind state creates our perception of circumstances. You choose. Now, in the beginning, it seems almost impossible. In Gita, the 6th chapter, Arjuna says, oh, Krishna, trying to control the mind is like trying to control the wind. And Krishna says, true that, but it can be done through practice. Abhyasa. Practice. Next idea.
In the absence of ideation born of the past, pure cognition or perception, which is of the nature of undivided consciousness, is alone present.
So Swamiji used to say a single-pointed mind is as good as no mind. There are times in the deepest meditation where we have moments of samadhi, of complete quiescence. But total absorption into an activity also reveals great beauty, great freedom. Some of my favorite pictures are the ones drawn, they're pen and ink drawings done by Leonardo da Vinci. They may be charcoal, I'm not sure. They are the grotesques of Florence. He would just sit there and look at the people of Florence, the common, ordinary people. People you and I, to a large degree, ignore. And if we see them, our nose crinkles up because they smell. We don't want to be aware of their suffering or how ugly they may be. Leonardo found beauty in them, and he would draw them. They're some of his most famous drawings. It's great art, just being totally present to the story written in a person's face. You and I, we bring our story with it. Glue it on. Go through life, hardly, mostly not even seeing it's directly in front of us. Because of this chintya, because of this sankalpa. And is that the rest of the end of that verse, the English?
Yeah, there's the example of the rice.
And the rice. Okay, next verse.
Vasishta Uvacha, Vasishta said, Dashurakhyai kaishate kathitha chintayatam tvaya. This story of Dasura has been narrated to you. Let this be pondered over by you.
Yeah, so think about it. This is the mananam. This is the hearing the story, seeing if we can apply it to our own life. So simple things to watch out for. If you're having conversations with people who are not in the room, you are caught up in sankalpa. Period. Doesn't mean we don't get prepared for a presentation at work. Well, someone's likely to act this, so if they do that, I want to be prepared and have this information ready. But that's not what we usually do. Oh, how could you say that? I really should have said blah, 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 blah. Anybody know the French term esprit d'escalier? No? Means spirit of the staircase. So you got to see two people downstairs and then they have a fight. Blah, 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 blah. Someone leaves the house, bangs the door. The other person turns and starts to go up the staircase and starts to think of all the things they could have said or should have said. You ever done that? You have a job interview, and afterward you think, oh, I should have said this. Oh, I wish I did. Anybody done that? Esprit d'escalier, spirit of the staircase. Nonsense, pointless. What are you rehearsing in the shower? I don't mean singing in the shower. I mean, what conversations are you having in your mind with people who aren't in the shower with you? So what the scripture is inviting us to do is watch our minds. All this is based on the capacity to take on sakshi bhav, attitude of the witness. Riffing a bit on what Justin had said earlier, he had all this stuff going on and he wasn't even aware that it was going on in his mind. That's one of the benefits of meditation. What's unconscious becomes conscious. All right, very important teaching in this book. Next verse.
Section 5. Vasana Tyagaha, the renunciation of mental impression. Kartrita chobhe vidyate paramatmani sarvasthoham akarterti dridha bhava nayadnagnya pravaha pavtitam karma kurvanapi na lipyate. The state of a doer and that of a non-doer both exist in the Supreme Self. Sinless one, Rama. I exist in all or everywhere. I'm not the doer. By such firm contemplation, one is not tainted, though performing action that has fallen to one's lot in the course of events.
So let's review the teaching on what is a vasana. A vasana is an impression. It comes from, or one etymology is vasati, which I think means to linger or dwell overnight. Sometimes it also means a fragrance. Is that what you were taught?
Yeah.
Yes.
No.
So you have to think of, like, my dear friend Sheila. I just adore Sheila's perfume. She's my Thursday symphony buddy. And so she gets in the car and, oh, that lovely, lovely fragrance. So even when she gets out of the car, the fragrance is still there, it lingers. So this is part of the flavor of a vasana. It is a subset of sanskara. A sanskara is an impression. We could not function in the world without sanskaras. For example, can you see this is a lamp? A newborn doesn't know it's a lamp. Can you see that's a table? Newborn doesn't know it's a table. There are no impressions. The vast majority of our sanskaras are neutral. They don't cause any particular problem. But a subset of sanskara is vasana. A vasana is an impression left in the unconscious, a sanskara, as the result of previously performed egoistic activity. It has the quality of I-ness and minus, and it's loaded with a story. This experience brought me joy, or that experience brought me misery. Now, a vasana is not a desire. It is the cause of a desire. A vasana is not an action. It is the cause of an action. Pure vasana in its seed form is what we experience in deep sleep, when the mind is folded up into its seed state. A vasana has two powers, avarana shakti and vikshepa shakti. Avarana shakti is a veiling power. The essence of the mind under the influence of vasana is the non-apprehension of my essential nature. The mind under the throes of vasana does not know I am Brahman. The second power is vikshepa shakti, which has all sorts of meaning. The first meaning it has The mind projects identification with the body. This becomes easy to understand if we go to the dream state. The precondition to dreaming is going to sleep. This is an avarana shakti. It is the non-apprehension of myself as the waker. Hi, Jim, go to bed, touch my pillow. Oh, yes. Non-apprehension of Jim as the waker. Then the mind goes, and it projects a dream body and a dream ego identified with it, meaning I think I am that body. And then the whole world proceeds from it. This is no different. When the mind is under the influence of vasana, the first thing is I have the non-apprehension of myself as Brahman. Then I think I'm a person. I think I'm Jim. I think I'm the body. Along with that comes a feeling of incompleteness. There's a world of name and form that can either bring me joy or misery, and I've got to have kartavya, struggle to get from point A to point B, to make this ego sense okay. Now, Shankara uses the metaphor of a silkworm. So a silkworm out of itself spins a thread of silk, like a vasana. Not a big deal. If you did a little bit of tapas, you break it. But we don't. We allow one vasana, then another thread of asana, and then another, and another, over lifetimes, until the psyche is completely cocooned. And this is the cause of the cycle of births and deaths. My belief that I'm a person in samsara that needs to be liberated, etc. Vasana. All of yoga from any school is some form of vasana exhaustion, vasana purgation. It is the annihilation of the vasanas that's considered liberation by the wise. Why? Because when the vasanas are roasted, when they're removed, I have clear apprehension of my self-nature. I see the world as it is. It really is. I know this is review for many of you. Any questions about what a vasana is and what its power is? Okay, going on, next verse.
Atha sarvam karomiti mahakrit kartri tayataya yadichhasi stitim rama tattamapyutatam viduhu. Rama, but if you desire the fixity or steadiness in the contemplation, I do everything, by that state of supreme doership, then even that is considered as excellent.
So here, what the scripture is saying is there are two mind states, ego states that we can take on, which are conducive to liberation. The first is, I do nothing. I am ever the untouched, uninvolved witness. It is Prakriti that's doing it. It's guna and karma, just making a light show. I am asangaha, unattached. Or we can take on the meditation, I do everything. I am that supreme doer. The self in me is that which is spinning galaxies, moving traffic. Everything is myself. Every person I meet, I am them, not just like them. They are me. So here he's talked about these two mind states. I do nothing, I do everything. Both of those are conducive to liberation. Going on.
अथवा सर्वकर्तृत्वम् अकर्तृत्वं च राघव सर्वत्यक्ता मनः पीत्वा सत्ताम् आत्र स्थितरो भव. Or else, Raghava, abandoning all conceptions such as the state of an all-doer or non-doer, and drinking up or absorbing the mind, be firm or steady as mere existence or being.
So a third practice, drop all of it. Let go, just absorb the mind and the self. Drinking deep of the bliss of the self. This is also useful. Going on.
Santyajya sa pratyena dehom hamiti yasthitihi bandho hi vasana bandho moksha syad vasanakshayah vasanam tam parittajya moksharthitam apityaja. That state or condition which regards I am the body should be renounced completely. Bondage by mental impressions is indeed bondage. Liberation is the destruction of mental impressions. Having abandoned that or the above mental impression, give up also the desire for liberation.
Yes, so I am none of it. It's all something I witness. It's a light show. I am everything. Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma. All this is Brahma. Or let go of even that and just abide in the self. Those are auspicious. But the ego notion, I am the body. I do this action. I don't do that action. The world is separate from me. This is conducive to bondage, and this continues to cement vasana. So what he's saying, was there a question?
Is this a different translation of that same phrase you always give us? Both bondage and liberation occurs to the mind. The self is ever free.
Well, the different idea.
Is it? Okay, because it sounds like they're kind of saying the same thing.
But what I do say, I have said on occasion that, well, yes, it is bondage and liberation both occur to the mind. But what he's saying here is, what are the practices we can do, Justin, that are useful? Give up the idea of karta, doership, however you want to do that. I am not the doer.
Yeah,
as
but
an individual.
I'm talking about that one phrase you give us: both bondage and liberation occurs to the mind. The self is ever free.
I hear you, dear. We'll
Yeah.
get to that, but that's not what
Okay.
he's saying today, right now. What he's saying is give up the notion of doership. That's the teaching. I am not the doer. Or I do everything. Or my mind is zoned out and I can't even ask the question. But what's problematic is if I allow myself to walk around in the world, I, Jim, do this. I, Jim, don't do that. That is conducive to bondage, because when I'm in that state, first of all, its cause is vasana, but it continues to reinfect the mind with more and more vasana. I found the first practice the most useful. This was just me. I am ever the witness. I do nothing. I watch the world go by, let the robot, the body, mind, intellect do its thing in the world. I do nothing. I'm ever the still, unchanging.
That's what the monk seemed like I met that I told you the weekend. He seemed completely like that when I talked to him. Yeah.
So, I lost my train of thought. Read the verse one more time for me, please.
That state or condition which regards I am the body should be renounced completely. Bondage by mental impressions is indeed bondage. Liberation is the destruction of mental impressions. Having abandoned that, or the above mental impression, give up also the desire for liberation.
Yes. So, what he's saying here is what is the bondage and liberation in the mind? That's, again, riffing a bit on what Justin was saying. The bondage is the mind under the throes of vasana. When I think I'm a person, when I think I'm the doer, when it's all about me, that's what needs to be renounced. What is liberation? When I have the deeply rooted conviction based on direct experience that I am Brahman. We practice that. Jnana abhyasa, the practice of knowledge. Now, at the end of this verse, there's a very interesting teaching. When your wisdom is steady, now you even give up the mumukshu. You give up the desire for liberation. I like to illustrate it this way. So here's the self, here's the ego. It thinks, I'm going to get to the self and be a realized person. Oh, I'm getting pretty close. I'm getting pretty close. I'm almost there. Wham! I am a realized soul now. And what actually happens is this. Oh, I want to be realized. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Ego wears itself out. No person is left to go, look at me. Nobody there. So the last thing to give up is the desire for liberation. How do you do this? With the attention introverted and you notice the self, you see a liberated person there. See a person in bondage there. What's there? Chidakasha. Space of awareness and stuff. So this doesn't mean limp yoga. I'm going to sit here. I'm giving up the mumukshu. I'm just going to eat ice cream and watch Netflix. That's not yoga. Strive hard for liberation until you've roasted all those vasanas. How do I know when a vasana is roasted? It no longer robs me of self-experience. When you have stita prajna, steady wisdom, now we even give up the mumuksha, seeker after liberation. This is subtle teaching. Seems hard to grasp at this point. Just put it on the shelf. All right, next verse.
Tamasi vasana purvam tyaktva vishaya vasitaha maitrayadi bhavananam anikrihana mala vasanaha. Having abandoned first the tamasic mental impressions, that is, those of the nature of inertia, ignorance, and darkness, steeped in the objects of the senses, take hold of the stainless mental impressions called the feeling or attitude of friendship and the like. Note, according to yoga, the four attitudes of Maitri, friendship for all, Karuna, compassion towards those in misery, Mudita, joy at others' happiness, and Upeksha, indifference towards the wicked, pacify the mind.
Yes. Or we could say the yamas and niyamas. So we take our negative, habituated thought patterns of redress and revenge and regret and fear and worry, and we practice cultivating more sattvic mind. I've been studying Yoga Sutra for the first time. I'm now dabbling into the second chapter, the Sadhana Pada, it's called. And the first sutra in the second chapter, see if I can remember it now. Tapas, Swadhyaya, Ishvara Pranidhana, Kriya Yoga. Tapas, austerities. What we've been talking about, this moving the mind away from its habituation. Swadhyaya. Two meanings. One meaning is my own study of the scriptures, but it also means applying the scripture in the laboratory of my own experience, getting to know my own kleshas, my own afflictions, my own doshas, working on that stuff. Ishvara Pranidhana. I said that right? Surrender to God. Or for those of us who are familiar with 12 steps, making the decision to turn my will and my life over to God's care. This is termed Kriya Yoga. Now, what's the difference between Karma Yoga and Kriya Yoga? Karma is action, Kriya is action, but karma is a completed action. Kriya implies a continuing acting, meaning I'm doing this stuff. This is yoga in action. Same ideas. So here in the beginning, we're cultivating virtues. new habits of thinking and behaving. Next verse.
Ta apyanta parityajya tabhi vyavahara napi anta shanta samasteho bhava chinmatra vasanaha. Having abandoned even those mental impressions internally or in the mind, and though acting with such attitudes, be possessed of the only impression or idea of pure consciousness with all desires abated or pacified within.
So you let your body, mind, intellect do what is its duty in the world. It's vyavahara, doing business. And after we've habituated the mind to some degree for these virtuous qualities, now we start to abandon even those and keep the mind focused on pure awareness, my own self-nature. Who am I? Chidananda Rupaham, Shivoham, Shivoham. I am the form of bliss consciousness, auspiciousness. So what Vasishta has laid out here is a sequence of practice. Again, this is an abridgment, so the compiler has broken it down into its terse and concise essence of practice. There's a lot in here. So my suggestion is go back and review this. This is good swadhyaya, your own self-study. Any thoughts about this? Next verse.
Tamapyatha parityajya manobuddhi samanvitam sheshe sthira samadhano yena tyajasi tatyajat. Then, abandoning even that mental impression or idea of pure consciousness associated with the mind and intellect, and finally, steady in deep contemplation on what remains, give up that by which you give up the various mental impressions.
So,
There's a note.
okay.
This rather difficult passage seeks to convey the Vedantic truth that ultimate reality, which is of the nature of indivisible consciousness beyond the mind and intellect, is capable of realizing only by negating all mental effort and ideation, and by establishing oneself in pure being, which transcends the domain of thought and will.
So again, the text is using the word samadhi, isn't it? Samadho.
Samadhana.
I'm not quite sure how. Anyway, the idea here is even the thought of knowledge, even the practice, who am I? Aham brahmasmi. We give up even that. Let the mind be silent. Samadhana, that peaceful state in mind when it rests in steady contemplation of the goal, which is not to be achieved by any amount of oscillation of the mind. That term is used by Shankara, the qualifications of a fit student. That's what it is. Quit all the thinking. Just be. Even give up the effort to do sadhana. Next verse.
Samadhim atha karmani ma karotu va hridaya yenasta sarvastho mukta evotamashayah. Let him then perform or not perform either action or yogic absorption into the undivided being consciousness. He in whom all prop or support has vanished with the mind is indeed liberated and has attained to the highest abode.
So the yogi, the woman of wisdom, has given up believing in the mind. Whether the mind is in samadhi, complete absorption, or functioning in the world, makes no difference. Mark of the person of wisdom is they've given up all struggles. This is the highest wisdom. Next verse.
Naishkarmena na tasyarthosti karmavihi satyakta vasanat maunat hrite nasta yutamma padam. For him, there is no significant, there is no signification or purpose by inactivity, nor is there any sense or purpose by actions. There is no excellent abode except that silence with all mental impressions abandoned.
Yes. So, whether she be sitting, standing, working, hanging out, talking about scripture, talking about movies, not talking at all. I like to use the phrase, the person of wisdom is out of control. There's no more the paranoid observer. How am I doing? Am I okay? What do they think of me? It's gone. There's nothing left to be done. There's nothing left to refrain from doing. Let this body, mind, intellect be the Lord's instrument in the world. Use and abuse me, God, as you would. There's a wonderful poem by Teresa of Avila. Christ has no hands or feet on earth but yours. So then the yogi becomes an instrument of the divine in the world. The mind has become like a clear crystal lens, that Shakti to come through. All right, next verse. Are we getting close to the end of that section?
Yeah.
Okay.
Na kechena jagat bhava tatvagnyam ranjayanyat mi bahyaspatya kacha purvam samadhe utito jagao. None whatsoever of those worldly ideas or modes satisfy the knower of the Supreme Being. Formerly, Kacha of the lineage of Brihaspati, risen from yogic samadhi for absorption in pure being consciousness, declared as follows.
Let's see what he declares. Going on.
Kim karomi kva gacchami, kim glihami tyajami kim, atmana puritam vishwam, mahakalpam bunayatha, na tadasthi na yatraham, na tadasti na yat mai kim anyat abhivachhami sarvasan vinmayam sthitam. What shall I do? Whither shall I go? What shall I take? What shall I give up? The universe is filled by or complete with the self, just as by the waters of the great dissolution at the end of the universal cycle. There is not that place where I am not. There is not that object which is not in me. What else shall I wish for? Everything is full of or consists of pure consciousness.
Yes. Pretty clear. Such is the mind of the person of wisdom. Sarvamaya, Sarvamananda. All is Maya, all is bliss. Though she may be seen to be moving in the world, she's like a dead leaf being blown in the wind, impelled by the force of the past and the desires of other people. No engine inside anymore, wanting. Gone. Next one. How many more do we have?
3 more.
Okay.
Yehi Raghava Satvastha Ramante Shishta Vartmani Sama Samarasa Saumya Sadatam Sadhu Vrittayah. Raghava, Rama. Those who are established in sattva, harmony, knowledge, and light, take delight in the way of the virtues. They are equal in all circumstances, of equal disposition, gentle, and always of good or virtuous conduct.
So he's describing those who have a sattvic mind, who are good, virtuous people. Going on.
Tesham padam mahabaho nugantavyam hi sarvada koham katham idham jeti pratyannena vicharyatam. Mighty armed Rama. Their footsteps must indeed be followed always. Who am I? How is this visible universe born? Thus, let it be investigated with effort.
So this is where I talk about the questions that come from Yoga Vasishta. First, who am I? That's only half the puzzle. What is this world? How does it come about? So there's no inside, no outside. All is Brahman. It's all. One more?
Yeah. Tamasim rajasim chaiva jatimanyapai apishitaha svavika vashat yanti santa sakti kajatitam. Those good men who have clung to or are united with the class or species of tamas or inertia, ignorance, and darkness, and rajas, or activity, passion, and agitation, or even others, attain to the state of the sattvika class, or those possessed of harmony, knowledge, and light through the power of their discrimination.
So, abhyasa vairagya cha, our own practice, viveka and vairagya, inquiry, renunciation, insight, removal of the vasanas. Shankara says even after realization of the truth, there exists a strong impression that one is the doer and the enjoyer. This is this karta that's been talked about. It's the cause of rebirth, meaning I re-identify And he says it needs to be conscientiously removed through steady and continuous identification with the self. The annihilation of the vasanas here and now is considered liberation. Awesome. Any thoughts? Try dropping. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Guru Pyo Namaha. Hari Om. Om. Where do we start next week?
Chapter 11, the story of Janaka.
Oh, good. It's a good story. Thank you all.